Victor Campenaert's, I would say, the most forward-thinking athlete in the World Tour. Only problem, though, when that comes into the training and possibly nutrition realm, it's a fine line between genius and bro scientist. And that's what we're going to look at in this video.
So today's
I'll just say, see these rainbow colors on the left-hand side? That is the Precision Hydration colors and logo. So they're sponsoring Lotto DSTNY this year, which is good because they're putting out videos like this. So they're not just providing product. It does seem like they're doing a lot in the content realm, which is really good to see.
hard session. It's not a super long ride, but it's has some real intense efforts. On a hard session like today, I try to simulate a race day. I go on the rollers, has to be quite early in the morning, and I keep the watts really low. It's just to wake up my body, stimulate the neuromuscular system.
Okay, so let's just set the ground here. So they're on team camp. They've got a long training ride to do today, and he's getting up before the training ride while it's still dark to go on the rollers. Let's see what session he's doing.
I do some breathing exercises with a training mask. I create some resistance on the breathing. I don't want to restrict my airflow, but it's just to activate my diaphragm. I do some small cadence sprints. It's just like to get like the brain signals to the muscles, really activate them as good as possible. I really feel like it helps me afterwards on the ride to be comfortable with high cadences.
Okay, bro science or actual science? Let's see. So he has been honest in the reason he's doing this, in that it's not a training session for a physiological benefit. He says he's doing this as essentially an activation to hopefully perform better on the subsequent ride. So 2 parts to this first session. He's got the trainer ride with the spin-ups, the activations, and then the breathing part. Now, for you and I, probably most average sort of enthusiast competitive riders, have a limited energy bank of time we can spend doing training-related things during the day. So for pretty much anyone, that time on the trainer is a complete waste of time because all he's doing it for is to feel better in the subsequent sessions. For him, though, he's on a training camp. He's a full-time athlete, so he can go and spend that time to get some marginal perceptive gain for the subsequent session. The mask for the breathing, not really doing anything. There's no evidence that restricted breathing while training does anything. There is respiratory muscle training. That is a thing. I think some of you might have seen the AeroFit devices where you train your respiratory muscles to adapt. And then when you do that over time, in theory, and there's some evidence that then has a lower energy cost because, just breathing when you're on the bike requires an energy cost, requires oxygen. So if you can do that more efficiently, in theory, you're using less energy. So there is a little bit of evidence for that, but you do that actually off the bike. That's something you do with a respiratory training device off the bike on its own, and it actually doesn't take that long. You usually only do it for a few minutes per day. It's not something you would do while training. So that whole idea of training your respiratory muscles isn't total BS, but doing it while you're on the bike isn't going to do anything physiologically. The reason why Victor would be doing it would be for a perceptive change, for almost a placebo effect, so he can then get more out of the session, the actual session he's doing for the day. The only thing I would not discount is that getting up earlier, getting ready, going and getting on the trainer, doing all this stuff does have an energy cost, and that energy cost can't be discounted. So you might say, well, it's good for Victor because he can put this energy in and then he'll get a perceptive change to potentially get a bit more out of his session later on, but there's still an energy cost. And I would say, for example, what else could he be doing with this time in the morning? Well, he could have slept in more to get more sleep, possibly. Maybe he could have done something more from a relaxation perspective, which can be really important on a training camp. So instead of going and getting on the rollers, he could have gone to the spa at the hotel and just relaxed with, some Netflix in the spa, to warm up in the morning, to relax and hold that relaxed state until the point where he goes for the ride. So from more of looking at improving recovery from a relaxation point of view, I would probably say those are the sorts of things that the average cyclist should be focusing more on, as opposed to, these things which do have a fatigue cost, but not a direct physiological benefit.
After this, what I usually do is I go in a cold bath to get, like the wake-up call.
Okay, so he gets off the rollers with his mask on, then he goes in a cold plunge.
feels nice. I try to go in and try to relax, breathe slowly.
Okay. Okay.
And then,
Yeah, the cold's not really doing anything. I mean, the cold for like a reduction in swelling, if he was, you know, an MMA fighter or a rugby player, could be doing something. But before a ride, again, I think Victor's a very sort of mental athlete. You know, he likes to know he's eking out every single possible marginal gain. But on that one, a cold plunge after you've been on the rollers with a mask on, it's just a lot of, you can tell it's a lot of stuff he's adding in. So maybe a nice warm spa, potentially. Relax and breathe and get your body moving and blood flowing before the ride, potentially, if he really had to do something.
just get ready, get my breakfast in. It's I usually don't eat that much before a ride or before a race. I try to eat a lot of carbs, actually.
I will just say, he mentions it later on, but he's doing about a 4-hour ride on this day, so keep that context in mind.
Because it's the carbs are the fuel
That
for
look like oats, quick oats
riding.
with jam.
We do long rides, but it's still with a lot of accelerations. So I try to get in about 100 to 120 grams of carbs in the morning. Afterwards, I
Nice.
prepare myself a bit for the ride.
So the only thing with the breakfast, high carb breakfast, going out for an intense training session that's long as well. Obviously, if you've watched this channel, you know I'm going to be big on that. The only thing I would say, it didn't look like there was much protein in that breakfast. The only thing I would question potentially with that breakfast is how much protein there was in there, especially because he's going out for a 4+ hour ride. If you don't have enough protein in the breakfast and it's just pretty much just carbs, you can find you're just getting hunger signals coming in throughout the ride. And then even if you're fueling well throughout the ride with like 120 grams of carbs, if that's coming through fluids and gels, you can be getting hungry at the same time as you're still fueling enough. And it's very awkward to ride like that. And it essentially increases the perceived effort on a ride when you're kind of feeling half hungry. So for a lot of people, you know, I hear a lot, so what did you have for breakfast for a ride? Oh, 2 pieces of toast with honey and a black coffee. And they're going out for a 3-hour ride. And I just think a better dose of protein with the breakfast, 20-30 grams, helps keep the hunger away. And yeah, and then you can just focus on your fueling in ride. That could just be gels and fluids if you want, and you won't get hungry. So just flagging the protein pre-ride, especially if it's a longer ride.
We're not at home here. I know the roads quite well, but I might have a look on VeloViewer to see, you know, where I do my intervals, how the corners look. That I don't have surprises coming up.
So much detail,
So,
isn't it? He's scouting the routes on VeloViewer for a training ride to find where to do those efforts. So impressive.
The session itself, it was like, I think 135k ride.
Okay, 135 kilometers at the speeds they're going. It's probably 4 hours, just over 4 hours.
We had 3 somewhat big climbs in there, and we divided the group in 2 with different intervals specific for the riders. The group I was in did like 3 2-minute efforts in the training.
Okay.
Sounds like
3x2.
really small workout, but these 2-minute efforts are extremely brutal. Try to hold the highest power and you're dying.
So 4-hour ride, and the only intensity they did in that 4-hour ride is 3 2-minute efforts. Maximal though. That's, yeah, it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're doing this much volume, you don't need much intensity to get the stimulus. So pretty impressive.
Like the first time when you think you're hitting the wall and your Garmin and you see it's 45 seconds into the interval, still 1 minute 15 to go. So that's really brutal, and that's you know, we want to destroy ourselves in a short effort to go really high in lactate, to then get the cardiovascular system working very hard to eliminate that lactate. I don't mind about sharing my power, so I'm just under 70 kilograms and I pushed out 670 watts in the first interval, 630 in the second, and 600 in the last interval.
When's the last time anyone watching this video did a 2-minute interval? To be honest, even with myself, I'm thinking, what's my 2-minute power? No idea. I think just the nature of where I ride and the racing I do, the 2-minute power is pretty irrelevant. I guess for a classics rider though, that's really important. But yeah, A very uncommon interval length, actually, the old 2-minuter.
Interval. So of course I fade out towards the end of the training, as every interval is all out.
Okay.
If you
So 3 by 2, but they're not pacing them. He's 2 minutes full gas, and then just riding around 2 minutes full gas, and then what he's saying here is his power's degrading over each one as he gets more fatigued. So pure anaerobic capacity session, max out 2 minutes. Well, actually, it's a little bit long, probably slightly over anaerobic capacity, but a capacitive effort session, just training the glycolytic system just to produce the absolute most amount of power as possible.
you would have every interval the same powers, you did it wrong.
Okay, let me go back.
Those
there.
are out towards the end of the training, as every interval is all out. If you would have every interval the same powers, you did it wrong. Those are good numbers, and the rest of the training.
Okay, so that's true for this type of effort where you want to do them maximally because you're training to increase your capacity in those efforts. The only thing is that doesn't necessarily apply to other efforts, as most of you would know. If you're doing more aerobic efforts, 8-minute efforts, 15-minute efforts, and you're repeating them, you don't just go the first one and do the whole thing maximally, because you do the first 10-minute effort all out, and your next one will probably be in tempo zone because you'll be totally cooked. So it depends on what the zone is that you're targeting, what the energy system is that you're targeting, depending on how you pace the intervals. So what he said there is correct for training anaerobic capacity, not necessarily as true when you're training other intensities, because there's other intensities where the time in zone is more important. For example, when you're training threshold. But good to flag that with Victor. That's one of the things when you've got training and you've got intervals. That's not the be all and end all. It's how you're pacing the session and executing the session that can then affect the stimulus of the session. And then as well, so when's he doing these 2-minute efforts? Dare I say he probably did these 2-minute efforts towards the start of the ride, if he was training purely to increase his 2-minute power, or if he's training to get up the eau de Quamon at the end of Flanders, he might be doing these 2-minute efforts after having already ridden for 3 hours. So that's where it's the execution of the session becomes really important, and not just what the session looks like on face value.
Training, it's easy. Of course, we go over climbs, so we ride about 270 watts uphill, let's say just under 4 watts per kilogram, which is an easy pace for a pro rider.
So 270 watts would be, for someone his threshold, just tempo, probably. High zone 2, low tempo. So that's what they're going up the climbs at. So yeah, pretty cruisy.
You have riders that exactly do what their coach say. You have more old school riders that freestyle a bit. But I'm the kind of rider that if my coach tells me something like this is the workout, I always want to know why and what's the goal, and I
Nice.
like we discuss about it, and how do you want my system to react in the effort. So we want to produce a lot of lactate today, and you can only produce a lot of lactate when you're full of carbs.
Yep.
You don't want to be low in carbs because it's not possible to produce lactate. So I aim roughly to intake 100 to 120 grams of carbs every hour.
100,
And
okay.
I would end up with like 200 watts average, which seems like an easy ride, but I want to be full of carbs in those intervals. It was quite early when we left this morning, so I only had 1 bottle in the first hour, which we mix up to 40 grams of carbs in every bottle. And so it's quite easy calculating the intake, because when I add it with a gel every 30 minutes, I end up with 100 grams of carbs every hour.
Okay, so it's 100 grams of carbs an hour, predominantly through the fluids and gels. It doesn't sound like he's had much solid food on this ride, which freaks people out. Like, kind of get a bit, oh, that's like not healthy because that's a lot of like sugars, and no solid food, which is like would be true if you were just sitting at home and just drinking sports drink. But when you're on the bike, the body doesn't care whether it's solid food or liquid. It just is processing through the carbohydrate. So even though there's no nutrition in any of this, he can go and eat nutritious food for the rest of the day. There's no sort of health concern with having really high GI carbohydrates while you're exercising, because they're uptake through the liver or straight through the gut into bloodstream, into blood sugar, and you're good to go. So yeah, there's no sort of health concern with the high GI foods. They're actually preferred for high intensity riding.
And we have a car following, so the water we are urinating, we count it, we measure it, so we exactly know what's going.
Okay, he's counting how much he's pissing. That's that's a new level of detail.
Going in and out, and we want to like not have too much loss. We know by testing.
Okay, this is where it starts to become a bit of bro science in a way. He's over analyzing something which has so many factors, and then coming to an endpoint which isn't necessarily reflective of anything. So, for example, when you're exercising, as the intensity increases, there's a hormone that your body produces, antidiuretic hormone, that stops you pissing. Well, you'll notice if you've ever gone for like a really easy 4-hour ride at low intensity, you might piss 3 or 4 times, but you can go into a 4-hour race and you don't have the urge to piss at all. It's because there's actually a hormone that stops your body processing through fluids through to your bladder and then to stop you peeing. The intensity of the ride will affect how much you're pissing. So that's regardless of if you're well hydrated or not. So using how much you're peeing as a measure of how hydrated you are, even though it sounds good and sounds really analytical, it's not really a reflection of your hydration at all. I mean, there's way more basic ways to know if you're hydrated or not that don't really involve those sorts of calculations. Like, are you pissing clear or nice light straw-colored piss, or are you pissing dark yellow? That's how you can tell you're hydrated. It doesn't really need to go to another level above that in terms of processing fluid. So that's one I'd kind of push back on.
About exactly what our salt concentration is. So because we weigh before and after, we exactly know what goes in and out. We also know how much fluid we lost, how much natrium or sodium, how much sodium we lost.
Staying hydrated is pretty easy. Just in terms of fluid intake, it's just drink enough through your ride so you're not super thirsty. And then when you get off the bike, just regularly drink throughout the day so that your piss isn't bright yellow. Like, it's really is kind of that simple. If you're pissing clear and nice light colored urine, you're probably hydrated. So it doesn't really need to go any further than that. The electrolytes, though, I do like. Now, it is a winter training camp, and so there's probably not going to be sweating that much. So sort of hyper-loading electrolytes wouldn't have much of a benefit. And for most people, people are really obsessed with electrolytes, but for a lot of people, they're not getting to a point where they're getting so much fluid loss where their electrolyte balance is really disturbed, and they would need to be like hyperdosing electrolytes. I don't think there's not many people getting to that point versus how many people are obsessed with electrolytes. I feel like there's a bit of an obsession there that's not justified, but it is useful. So they got precision hydration, so they can do the sweat testing. So they know if they're really salty sweater or not salty at all, and then they can just pretty easily adjust how much electrolytes they're getting in from that. So I don't mind doing that, but again, it's a winter training camp. If Victor just had sort of an electrolyte tab in each bottle and then ate his normal diet throughout the day, which has salt in it anyway, he's probably not going to run into any issues. It's different if you're doing sort of a heat training camp where you're doing 4 hours in 40-degree weather every day. So potential over-analyzing in the hydration department, in my opinion.
So there you have it. An insight into what goes on a hard day on a professional.
All right, I think I'll end the video there. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks, Precision Hydration and Victor and Lotto DSTNY for the video. And hope you guys learned something along the way, and I'll catch you in the next one.